Here is part 2 of your nitrogen cycle notes. This part of the notes is going to focus more on the human impact issue, how we are actually impacting the nitrogen cycle. And what you're going to realize is that there are two things that we are really impacting. We are impacting the environment, and we're also impacting human health with this one. With the water cycle, I mean, we were really focusing on how humans impact the environment of the water cycle. With the nitrogen cycle, it gets a little bit more complicated, and the impact gets more extensive. Not only can we impact the environment, but we're also going to impact our own health. And over the past 100 years, what we've been doing is doubling the amount of nitrogen entering the cycle. And what I really mean by that is we're taking nitrogen that's been stored up in the geosphere, in fossil fuels and things like that, and we're putting it into the more active part of the nitrogen cycle. There's kind of like a slow nitrogen cycle, fast nitrogen cycle. So we're taking nitrogen that's been in the slow cycle, putting it into the fast cycle, and that's why we're seeing these impacts on us as well as our environment. And the big player here is these fertilizers that we are kind of creating, these commercial inorganic fertilizers. So they're not part of any living system or living organism. And these fertilizers are, during summer, spring, fall time, it's for your lawn to keep it nice and green, things like that, but also farmers as well. Okay, farmers need those fertilizers to help their crops grow, and in turn those crops feed everybody. All right, so these fertilizers, they're important, okay, but we need to be able to understand how those fertilizers are impacting society and the environment as a whole. Another key one is when we're taking those fossil fuels, geosphere right here, when we burn that, we create, or we're adding nitrates to the atmosphere. And what that's going to do is it's going to kind of do two things. It can add to acid precipitation, so like acid rain, things like that. But it also impacts global warming as well. Okay. Usually when we think of global warming, you think of this thing right here, CO2, carbon dioxide, increasing the average temperature, right? But nitrates can kind of help with the global warming thing as well. And the increase in this guy right here, or the nitrous oxide produced by animal livestock waste. So farmers have a lot of waste from either cows or chickens or whatever they've got on their farm. All that waste has nitrogen in it, right? And then combine that with all of their fertilizers. You put those two things together, and we have problems with global warming as well as ozone loss. A lot of the nitrogen that we put on our lawns from these fertilizers, these inorganic fertilizers, not all of it helps plants grow. Some of it's washed away when we have rain or we're watering our lawns and stuff like that, and eventually that nitrogen ends up in our lakes. And I'm sure you guys have seen this every August, September, our lakes go green. They turn this nasty green color. Okay, I've got a picture of that here in just a second, and that's because of this nitrogen. All right. Also, here's kind of the human impact, or the human health impact. Excess nitrates, they enter the groundwater, harming young children, also pregnant mothers, something called blue baby syndrome. So we can see right here on this slide that nitrogen can impact both the environment and human health. So here's that nasty green lake that you guys have probably seen, August, September, pretty much every single year. When I was growing up in Menasha, we had a lake, really nice lake, but nobody ever wanted to go in the lake around August or September because we get all this green gunk in our lakes and it would smell awful. And all of that comes from excess nitrogen, so excess nutrients, mainly nitrogen, sometimes phosphorus and stuff like that, going into our lakes and rivers. And that excess nitrogen comes from the fertilizers that we've been putting on our lawns all summer long. So if you think about it, plants need that nitrogen. They want it, right? So if we get a lot of nitrogen in the water, we're going to stimulate plant growth in the water. And that's all this stuff is. It's algae. Okay, we get an algae bloom here in our lake. Okay, so the plants are actually loving this stuff right now. Okay, so when that nitrogen comes into the water like this, all the little algae guys in here are like, oh my God, time to party. Okay, lots of food. They eat it up. Okay, and we get this big algae bloom. All right, so there's tons and tons of nitrogen, usually NO2 or something like that, in the water. Okay, now what's happening though is that the algae right here is eating it up. Okay, so eventually all this nitrogen is going to go away once this algae's eaten it all up, right? Now remember, nitrogen is plant food, right? Kind of. So once the food is gone, what happens to the plants? They die. Okay, so once they die, all these plants, okay, so we had lots of plants, this algae, okay, those plants, they're going to die. They're going to kind of sink down in here. Okay, what's waiting for them? You know it, our best friend, bacteria. And what that bacteria is going to do is it's going to eat those plants, right? It's breaking it down, decomposing all of those plants. So it's kind of eating all of the dead plants. As it eats, it uses up oxygen, O2, right? So eventually, since there's so much stuff to eat, so many dead plants and algae in here, all this oxygen is going to go away, okay? Or a lot of it is going to go away. And eventually what we end up with is something called this, a dead zone. Okay, we end up with a dead zone in our lakes. And as you can see in this picture, we also can end up with a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. Okay? If you think about it, this should make sense, right? So right here we got Mississippi River going through, comes out right here, right? Okay, Mississippi River not only is bringing water with it, but is also bringing all of the nitrogen from all of these really nice farming communities all along the Mississippi River, including us here in Minnesota. Okay, so that's going to travel down, concentrations of nitrogen are going to increase, and that nitrogen ends up in the Gulf of Mexico in these red, orange, yellow colors. Those are the worst dead zone areas in the Gulf of Mexico. All right, and it's because of us adding excess nitrogen into that system. Okay, other places where this nitrogen is coming from, creating this big word right here, cultural eutrophication. That is just the process of adding excess nitrogen and causing lakes to age or kind of die too soon. Okay, you know, over here we got our inorganic fertilizers from farms, all this animal waste from farms, but we can also have excess nitrogen compounds produced by cars and factories up here in the atmosphere, and then it rains, and then we get too much nitrogen in water. Maybe we can get it from municipal sewage from us, untreated, going into the water. Lots of different ways for us to add excess nitrogen into these lake ecosystems, overloading them with too much nitrogen. Plants love it. Nitrogen goes away. Once the nitrogen goes away, that oxygen that's in there also kind of goes away, and we end up with our dead zones. All right. So that's kind of it, guys. First video talked about the importance of nitrogen, went through the movement of nitrogen through the cycle. This little video talked about human impact and how we're going to, impact not only our environment but human health as well. I've got one more video for you guys. It is kind of a recap of everything. It's going to be a diagram that helps you kind of trace and see where nitrogen goes in all the different forms. You guys need to answer your essential questions in the summary section of your notes. You also need to answer the summary paragraph on Moodle. Don't forget to do that.